Deputy Catherine Connolly.
A few words on this, Minister, and just let me say I absolutely agree with the contribution by Deputy Charles Ward. Nothing would have prepared me for the extent and the damage done by the defective blocks issue in Donegal. I thought I knew it from listening to my colleagues speaking on it, and my previous colleague, Dr. Thomas Pringle, and indeed members of Sinn Féin. Nothing prepared me for the extent of the disaster and what people are going through and have gone through in relation to that. And I fully support Deputy Charles Ward in relation to that. Not only is it defective blocks and defective concrete, but defective understanding and a defective compensation scheme. All are defective. And today is the anniversary of Creaslock, and I would just say that is absolutely not an election issue. But I promised at every opportunity to repeat what they asked me to repeat when I met them in a private capacity up in Donegal, and that was to say they feel abandoned nationally and locally. So I just want to say that for the record. In relation to the budget, I cannot believe that we have utterly failed to learn from the pandemic, from the declaration of a climate and a biodiversity emergency in 2019. And over the years, your government has acknowledged that the planet is burning. And I searched in vain in the two speeches to see was there any recognition of not alone the emergencies that we've declared, but the necessary transformative action. I don't expect any budget to sort out those crises, but I do expect a budget to be put in context of the challenges posed, the existential threat posed by climate change, and also in relation to public health infrastructure so that we would be prepared for the next pandemic. I also see, very worryingly, a continuation of the business model as usual, continue as usual when transformative action is needed. And we have over 16,300 people homeless, and there's no recognition and a framework put in here how that crisis was caused. And the Housing Commission have said we need a radical reset of policy, and yet we're fiddling around with more pieces added to a jigsaw with no overall picture. And indeed, the figure in this budget is 2 billion now for HAP and one or two other schemes. And not alone is HAP should be phased out, not overnight. Obviously, people are utterly dependent on it now. But the point is that you're still using the language that people are adequately housed. They are now in social housing. And such a twist of language leads to a huge problem with trust for people on the ground and what's been said. If you are in receipt of a HAP payment, you are not adequately housed in terms of social housing, and you're twisting language on its head. And housing is the most fundamental human right to provide a home for our people in a so-called republic. In relation to this plan, I just pick out some aspects. There are some good points in it, but forgive me if I just highlight the amount that's missing. So a solemn promise to do away with the means test for carers, utterly reneged on. And I'm just going to read out some of the figures for carers. And again, it's predominantly female, which might go a long way to explaining why we continue to ignore that and why economists ignore that. And the number of people in unpaid positions just increases. Between 2016 and 22, the number of people providing regular unpaid care increased by over 50%, up to nearly 300,000 in 22 and rising all of the time. I won't go into the other figures. And then we haven't abolished that. The opportunity wasn't taken. And I know your heart and soul is behind abolishing that. And I don't know why it's not happening. I don't know how we can go with economists telling us we have a growth economy when we're not valuing the number of carers that are doing unpaid leave. And then we promised a cost of disability payment. I could go back over all of the reports that set out the need for this. Absolutely not even mentioned. In relation to housing, one of the major solutions to the housing crisis is to make a commitment to build public housing on public land. Simply It won't sort out the problem, but it will go a long way to being part of the solution, and also will give you a strong message that the government is in the middle, is ilord an éini as regards the solution, and the prices ultimately will have to come down. Instead of that, we're allowing public land to be used for a mixture of housing, and absolutely no analysis of that solution to the amount of people waiting on a waiting list. And in Galway City, it's between 15 and 20 years. And I stand here today and say, in Galway, as we talk, 64 patients are on trolleys, 40 in the accident and emergency, and 14 in wards. And so we play around with numbers all of the time, and we talk about the billions going into health, but we ignore the fact that we have failed to train enough people to work in our hospitals, that we're reliant on agency staff that costs a lot more. And I know, Minister, you're putting your head down, and I wouldn't blame you really in a sense, because these problems come up year after year, and we need to actually put out the message they're not inevitable. A republic worth its name has to recognise that the neoliberal ideology to date has actually created these problems. And so we can't keep going on. The latest report that was published, I think, from an EU report on climate change pointed out that we're failing to recognise that we can't continue with the same growth, unsustainable growth approach and do something about climate change. It is not possible. Violence against women has been mentioned by Deputy Ruth Coppinger, and there's an increase of 11-something million in it. It is a drop in the ocean compared with the figures, despite our third strategy now for zero violence against women. The figures keep rising. It's an absolute crisis, and at a Conservative estimate, it's costing $2.5 billion to the economy every year. And every year since 2016, I stand up here and I point out perhaps the economists could put a specific value. I'm told it's 2.5 billion, and so that we could save money for the economy by actually stopping it. And then public childcare. There isn't one single line in commitment to public childcare, which is the solution to the problem, where people for years have been paying two mortgages, one for a house and one for childcare. The previous government with the Green Party went some way, and I always praise them for that, to reducing the costs. But the absolute answer is public childcare, because otherwise people can't work, and they need to do that and not be able to be paying a second mortgage. Overall, in relation to the Irish language, there's an utter failure to recognise that there's an absolute crisis of housing problem in the Gaeltacht. Agus tá an Gaeilge agus cuasaí tithíochta fiche fuche le céile. Tá méadú súrach ó híh agad de údarás na Gaeltachta. Breis is gá vilu. Ní lóre sin chun dulin gle le na dútláin atá scór údarás na Gaeltachta agus na Gaeltachta.
And just before I move to the next group, I would like all